Happy Hour Batman. I am Ben. I'm an Episcopal priest and co-founder of the All Ports Open Network. On this show that you are watching right now, Holy Happy Hour Batman, I am joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk about life, faith, spirituality, game design philosophy, people's origin stories as designers, and whatever else comes up on the show week to week. It always seems to change. Tonight on Holy Happy Hour Batman, I have another prolific and innovative game designer I'm very excited to have on the show. Sen-Foong Lim is the designer of many, many games, so I cannot give you all of Sen's game credits. But Sen is both a board game and a RPG designer, which I'm really excited. I think this is our first guest who was a board game designer on the show, which I'm really happy to have gotten around to having a board game designer who also does RPG stuff. So super fun. Looking forward to talking about that. But games like Junk Art, But Wait, There's More, Acrotory, and then working with like just a whole plethora of games that are like using IPs that you might be familiar with, like The Legend of Korra, Pro Bending Arena game, and Orphan Black, the card game, and also co-creating escape room in a box type puzzle games, and developing other games like Big Trouble in Little China the game, and also working on RPGs, including once again Avatar Legends, which you may have heard of given that it was so ridiculously successful in its Kickstarter. So we're going to talk about all of that and more here in just a few minutes with Sen when we bring him up on the show in just a moment. Before we do that, though, some housekeeping stuff here. Holy Happy Hour Batman is a production of allportsopen.com. Check out our website, allportsopen.com, for our lineup of podcasts and streams, sharing, making, talking about great stories, shows like hit horror audio drama Weeping Cedars, Delinquent Comics, my Masked Actual Play podcast, which had a new episode drop today, so you can check that out. And our Wednesday night stream that I GM, Troika stream, sci-fi comedy game, Big Time Space, is back. We were back from a hiatus last Wednesday, and we'll be back again in 2 nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time at the All Ports Open Network Twitch account. So that's Big Time Space is back. A little bit of housekeeping for Holy Happy Hour that I'm just excited about. We're about to approach the 1-year anniversary of the show, and we're really excited about that. So if you watch the show regularly, you may have seen my episode with Meg Baker. And if you did, then you saw sort of live as it happened. I think it was live on the air. Meg had the idea for the 1-year anniversary of the show to interview me for the show rather than having me interview a guest. So Meg Baker is going to come on April 4th and is going to interview me, which I can't get over. The fact that I'm going to be interviewed by Meg Baker, one of my personal RPG heroes. It's going to be freaking awesome. So that's Monday, April 4th. And you should make sure you mark your calendar so you can, so you can make sure you don't miss it. Okay, so it is happy hour. And so we do have our cocktail of the week up on the screen. And you can see that we have a cocktail inspired by one of Sen's games. This is I called it an exquisite cocktail. And so that is named after An Exquisite Crime, a game that we'll talk in just a moment with Sen about. That is a co-designed game with Banana Chan. So this game is super cool. Like, I haven't gotten to play it or anything, but like it just looks really awesome. It's kind of like a crime-solving game that involves psychic detectives and drawing, like sketching. So we'll ask Sen all about that in just a moment and talk about that. But you can see the cocktails up on the screen. So I want to make something kind of noir-esque, something. So I literally made what I called on here the exquisite syrup, or it is a Pinot Noir syrup. I thought that might sort of fit the vibe a little bit. So I have to say that I did borrow heavily for this cocktail from a drizzly recipe that I saw, if I'm being totally honest about it. But I modified it a bit. So you can see you have to make a syrup to make this cocktail. It's a little bit involved. So to make the exquisite syrup, you take 2 cups of Pinot Noir, half a cup of those really amazing Luxardo maraschino cherries. If you've never had them, they're like candy and delectable and amazing. They're like the most freaking delicious thing ever. And then the zest of one orange and the zest of one lemon. You, in order to make the syrup, you combine all that stuff into a like saucepan, and you have to like kind of stir it as you bring it to a real soft boil. You want it to like reduce by half through like simmering. And so you make this, then you bring it down to low, cook it for another 10 minutes. You really want it to get thick and syrupy. And then you can cool that syrup down. You can make it in advance. For the cocktail itself, it's 2 ounces of bourbon, an ounce of fresh lemon juice, an ounce of that exquisite syrup. And you want to serve this up. So basically, fill a cocktail shaker with ice. Combine all the ingredients in the shaker, and then serve it in like a martini glass with some of those maraschinos for garnish. So this is my exquisite crime inspired cocktail, which I have dubbed an exquisite cocktail because it is. It's those Luxardo maraschino cherries, and that Pinot Noir syrup really will push it over the edge. It's really a kind of decadent, sort of sexy. And the cocktail that inspired it is called The Wrong Uber. And I was hanging out with a game designer friend who's been on this show, my friend Gabrielle Rabinowitz, who is the designer of Manish Tana. And we watched people try to steal our Uber. We had to chase it down and get it. So I thought that was also a little bit of a cool tie-in because that literally just happened to me the other night. So if you want to find the original drink that I basically borrowed very, very heavily from to make this, it's called The Wrong Uber. It's a drizzly cocktail. So there you go. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring our guest on the show. Sen, welcome to Holy Happy Hour, Batman.
Hey,
how are you?
Thanks for having me. Am I Robin? Do I get to be Robin then?
Yes. No one's ever made that. No one's ever made that comment, actually. So you're. Not sure how. This is the first time that's come up. But yeah, you can be my Robin tonight.
Yeah, I get to wear tights. No, I just like Robin. So I don't like Damien. Okay. I'm a non-Damien fan.
Interesting.
I am much more a fan of all the other Robins, except the one that eventually went crazy and killed people. But
sure.
I think Red Hood is okay as a villain. I'm not sure about Red Hood as a hero, but whatever.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you had a favorite. Do you have a favorite Robin? But it sounds like
Dick Grayson.
Dick Grayson.
I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt.
Okay.
And I wear Nightwing, like a rash guard when I grapple.
Nice.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, I wasn't planning to start this conversation by talking about the black belt thing because I didn't know about it, but now that's 100% what I want to talk about.
That's
so tell us about that background. That's fascinating.
So I wrestled as a teenager for years and years, and I have always been interested in the grappling arts because I can't see worth crap. When I take my glasses off, I have 2200 vision, which, if you know anything about legal blindness, that is basically what uncorrected legal blindness is, or actually corrected legal blindness is 2200. So my vision's real bad. And I have astigmatisms in my eye that go in opposite directions. So not a lot of corrective stuff that can be done for my eyes. So I really don't see well without glasses. And when you do a martial art, you kind of have to see well. Well, you don't have to see well, but if you do a striking art, you kind of have to see your target.
Yeah.
So I grappled ever since I was young because I didn't have to see anybody. And so eventually, when UFC came out in like the mid 90s, there was this thing like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's like, oh, that looks awesome. And then I got hit by a truck. So that's where that stopped. When I got hit head on by a transport truck.
Oh my gosh.
On my way home from work one day. Wow. And several years later, after like thousands and thousands of dollars of rehabilitation, I thought, you know, I should do this again. I should do something again. And so I started with somebody who I'm proud to call my friend, who was a black belt when I trained with him. But I actually don't train under him, which is funny because he was so pivotal to me finding that jiu-jitsu was something I could do. And it was really interesting because he's like, yeah, given your history, don't go train with any old school. Do some private lessons with a higher belt because they won't hurt you. Whereas like a new white belt will smash you, right? Just because that's all they know how to do.
Sure.
Like, use strength against you. And so, yeah, 15 years later, I've have a black belt, and I teach at least once or twice a week.
Oh, it's so
And
cool.
yeah, I really enjoy it. It's like a game. It's basically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, very specifically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is like a game with your body.
Mm,
It's like often described as like a chess match on the ground. And
interesting.
if it's quite funny, there's a bunch of people who I know from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who are also like big time gamers who love gaming. And we talk about games whenever we see each other, not jujitsu. And yeah, it's just really interesting that the mindset behind the planning of your strategies in jujitsu is very similar to chess,
That's
really, in
it.
a lot of ways. It's like physical chess,
Yeah,
right?
that's really interesting. I because I don't think I naturally would have thought of them as being a similar. But I mean, it's strategy, so it makes sense. But I would have not have, I would have thought of it that way.
Well, it's interesting because so it's a lot slower than it looks. Like
Mm,
once you get to a level, and I tell my students this all the time. It's like you all move in slow motion to the black belts because we just know what you're going to do. We can feel it. You
mm,
don't even have to see it. We can feel what you're going to do when your body changes. And this is not like some Jedi mind trick. This is just years and years of grappling.
mm-hmm.
But it's slower because you can hold people and you can survive for a little while underneath somebody or on top of them without knowing what your next move is, and you can plan. And so I think that's why it's very different than some of the striking arts, where it's like if you stop and plan, you're going to get knocked out. In grappling arts, there's a lot more time to feel those positions out and control somebody in a position before you move in for like a submission finish or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a little easier to think about it like a game.
Huh. That's
Like
cool.
like in video games, like you're button mashing
Yeah.
with like if you played Street Fighter and you didn't know what you're doing, you can still button mash and just
Sure.
kind of do okay against people who don't know what they're doing either. Um, because you're just throwing fists and punches and kicks. Jiu-jitsu is not really like that. Like if you do that, you're probably giving the person something to use against you, right? So it's a neat art, and it's very much. I think it basically kind of saved my life in a lot of ways. Like after my accident, I was like 50 pounds overweight, which is a lot for somebody who only weighs 125 pounds.
Sure.
So I was well, I wasn't 50 pounds. I was probably 25 pounds overweight.
Mm,
But still, that's a lot for me.
sure. Yeah.
And it just really got me back to physical activity, to being with people, which was really hard over the pandemic, not being able to do that.
Yeah.
There's just something about touching people and like
Yeah.
sweating with them that is very familial. It's very grounding. It's very
Mm-hmm.
humbling as well,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes you colleagues more than like just being like two guys who go out and pump iron together
Mm-hmm.
or
Sure.
whatever. So it's definitely been a life changer for me. And
Mm.
I think if anybody is interested in a martial art that doesn't want to be punched in the head,
Mm.
check out Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's wonderful.
That's
There are
really
lots of other
cool.
cool arts too, though.
Sure.
If you just want to learn how to move your body or self-defense or health or whatever your reason is, martial arts has a style that will probably suit you, which is kind of like games, right? There's probably a
Yeah.
game that suits you better because you think or feel a certain way. So, yeah.
Yeah,
There
it's
you
like the
go.
person who
That's
says
my
like
black belt story.
it's like the person who says they don't like board games, right? And the answer for any board game geek knows the answer to that is like, well, we haven't found the right board game yet for you, like
Yeah,
because there's a board
right.
game for everybody.
And the same thing with RPGs, right? There's
Yeah.
probably something that you would like if you
Yes.
knew. You just don't. You just think about it as like D&D, and I don't want to talk about elves and dwarves. It's like, okay, we don't have to talk about elves and dwarves. What if we talked about superheroes or something like that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now we're
Exactly.
talking, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually have been thinking about. I've been thinking about doing martial arts again. So I actually have a martial arts background myself too, from when I was in high school. So I did Taekwondo with my family.
Mm-hmm.
We did Olympic style Taekwondo, World Taekwondo Federation style Taekwondo. My parents and my sister all ended up getting black belts. My dad was a second degree black belt. And I was invited to black belt test. Of course, this is a long time ago now. I was invited to black belt test, and I never did it because I
Oh.
went to college. It was like right
Oh,
around when I
yeah,
went to
yeah.
college. I didn't go so far that I couldn't have driven back for the But to be honest, it was like the opposite of your story in that stopping was probably the worst decision I've ever made in my life because I gained tons of weight in college. I became way out of shape. It was like my main source of activity. I stopped exercising. And if I'm just being blunt about it, like I'm paying the price of that now at this point in my life. And
Yeah.
my son does karate. He does action karate, which is a chain around where I live.
Mhm.
Northeast chain of karate. And yeah, so I watch him do it, and I keep thinking like, man, if I got in, because here's why I've been thinking about doing it again, because like getting myself motivated to exercise, getting myself motivated to like do achieve the weight loss goals I want to achieve has been tough for me lately, and
Mhm.
I remember the thing you were describing, which is the social aspect of the martial arts of
Yeah.
like the camaraderie, the relationship building, the like doing it together aspects of it that was so motivating, right? And so I've been thinking lately, like, I should consider redoing this. It's just a matter of like pulling the trigger, wanting to, and if I'm being honest, the money because it isn't cheap.
Sure. Yeah.
And but yeah, I've been thinking about doing it again. So maybe this conversation
Yeah.
will push me over the edge.
There you go. I mean, it's an investment in yourself. That's what
Mm-hmm.
everybody will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
But
No, it's true.
also, if your kids are doing it, then it's family time.
Exactly.
So my kids, both are, well, so Eli's a brown belt in karate. Ethan's a black belt in karate. Ethan is a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Eli probably got up to probably just yellow belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My youngest found volleyball and basketball, so he's doing that competitively now. It doesn't have to be competitive, but he didn't like martial arts as much as Ethan did, and as much as I did. So it's fine, and that's okay. But we still have learned a lot together on the mats and spend time there, and it's fun. Like every time Ethan comes home, he's at university now, in a city that's about 2.5 hours away. And so whenever he comes home, it's like, make sure you bring your rash guard, make sure you bring your gi, or I have an extra gi here for him because you're coming to class. That's how we spend time together. It's not a threat. It's just, yeah, you're coming to class, right? So yeah, I think martial arts they're a great way to be together as a family, do something together, train, get physically healthy, mentally healthy, all those things. Like it's pretty funny. There's in our bowing in part of the class, there's this thing that I don't know where I picked this up. I think it's part of one of my old instructors who did it. And we just kind of bow our heads for 20 seconds and clear our minds. And that's literally my favorite 20 seconds of the day,
Mm,
right? Where it's just like, clear your mind. Okay, now get to it,
mm.
right? Because all of the stuff from outside the dojo that's kind of pressing on you, like bills and work and deadlines, clear that out of your mind. Train hard for an hour, 2 hours, and then go back to the real world. So it's kind of like this sanctum sanctorium
I was gonna
away
say,
from
it's
things, right?
was gonna say like I can relate to that from like because a lot of times that's what moments of prayer do for me more than
Yeah.
like I think a lot of people think of prayer as like talking to God or something, whereas a lot of times like especially as a priest I lead liturgy at church
Mhm.
and there are these moments I intentionally put in for silence and I don't know how everyone in my congregation uses those moments, but they're for me what you just described. They're my moment to like I'm gonna set aside everything else, focus on just the present moment, being here, grounding me,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah. Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
my favorite moment of the liturgy is when there's actual silence in the liturgy.
Yeah. Silence is such a funny thing. So, as a therapist, silence to me is this. It's hard a lot of times, sitting one on one with somebody and not talking because you just kind of want to fill that space. And you have to fight the urge to do that so that people can actually reflect on,
Mm,
what do we talk about today? What are we doing today? What is going on?
mm,
And to get the answer from them as opposed to telling them the answer, right? That
mm,
I don't really like. My goal in therapy is to not do any work. Uh,
mm,
Also, my goal in jujitsu, I am kind of the laziest practitioner ever. No, that's not true. But so I do this thing. Part of the therapy mindset that I go into is called solution focused therapy,
mm,
or brief interview style. So in that, my goal is really just to facilitate conversations in which you as the person who I'm working with will find their own solutions.
Mm.
And a lot of times that needs introspection, that needs time and space and quiet. And it doesn't need me like yammering on or me telling you these are 17 resources that you could read, because that's not where the solution needs to come from. A lot of the solutions have to come from within so that the person will actually do those things, right? They have buy-in. I thought of that. That's a good example of, oh, I can do that because I thought of it and I own that, as opposed to this is something the therapist told me to do. I don't really think that's right for me, right? So it's this whole thing with silence is a very key tool, and I don't think we have enough of it in our lives. I enjoy silence. I really do.
Could not agree more.
Yeah. I can actually hear light bulbs. So I'm really hypersensitive in my hearing. And so I'll sit here in my office with my headphones on, nothing playing, just so I can't hear the light bulbs. And I mean, that might say something about my light bulbs more than it says about my hearing, but I hear them everywhere. I hear electricity, like turning things on all the time. But silence is good. Silence is good. That's all I'm saying is embrace the silence, enjoy the silence, let it fill you, and then you can fill it with stuff. But a lot of people find themselves needlessly filling it with words that aren't helpful at times, right? So anyway,
no,
that's like mental jujitsu.
This is great. No, this is great. I feel like I do not sit with silence as much as I used to. I think about like my seminary days. I think back to like when I was in seminary and how like I took so much time for intentional like silence and meditation. And I lived in New York, so I used to like climb up to the roof of my building because I was on the 5th floor of a 5-story building, so I would like sit up there on a yoga mat and like meditate basically in silence. And of course it was the sound of the city around me is New York, so Midtown Manhattan basically. So it wasn't total silence, but I used to make time for silence. And I do find now, I don't know if it's, well, okay, so that was 2010, 2011, 2012, right? In that time period.
Yeah, so
right?
10 years ago.
10 years ago, right? In that 10 years, like now I'm on Twitter all the time. I'm on, I got social media in my hand. I got multiple devices. Smartphones were around, but they weren't like now. It's like the internet wasn't quite as pervasive in everything that I do like it is now. So I feel like I fill up if it's not, so it's not just sound, right? Like it's words, it's screens, it's because like Twitter's loud, but it's not loud. Am I making sense?
Yeah. It's like sensory input, right? Any type of input that is like not the natural world. I think if we step away from that kind of input for a little bit, I think it's healthy, to be honest, right? That little cleanse every now and then, and maybe make it a daily part of, like a ritual or something where it's like, okay, every day I'm going to go do this thing. And it doesn't have to be long. It can be like 5 minutes. Or my thing is like, it's 20 seconds at the beginning of a class. Like just bow your heads, close your eyes, clear your mind, get into that void, that nothingness. I don't explain it like that, but it's like, just like clear your mind, get ready for class. Okay, let's go. And those types of things I think are really can be transformative in terms of like your mental state. Like if you're thinking so much about that deadline, how are you going to perform in a class that's about a martial arts where you're literally like choking people and breaking their joints, right? You don't want people to make mistakes. You don't want people to like not focus on what they're doing. You want people to take it seriously and have fun. But sometimes if the outside world comes into that space, then they're not having fun, and that's not good. So I use that particularly to clear that out. And I wonder if that's can be something that we do in gaming as well. Like and a lot of times we do that. We do that just socially, right? We'll talk about everything that's happening in our life. And it's like, okay, hey, let's get down to the game now. Like my weekly masks game. I play a weekly mask game too. I love masks. And at the beginning, while we're waiting for the last couple people to straggle into the Discord, we're all just talking about our days and things like that. And then once everybody gets here, it's like, okay, we're now in character, or we're now starting the game. I don't didactically say that we are starting the game now, but it kind of flows into that. And then all the problems of the world sort of disappear. And then when I say, now it's time for stars and wishes and whatever. And like, did you grow closer to your team or further away at the end for your end moves and masks? um, after that, people then start talking about their lives again. So I think games are this like little magic circle in which we have the ability to kind of get away from the everyday and really put our effort and energy and mind and focus into living in this other space where we can do other things, and they're interesting. They're sometimes they're scary, sometimes they're horrific and hard, and sometimes it's painful, but it's just different. And I think that release, that ability to get rid of the day to day for like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours for a session of a role playing game is healthy.
Yeah.
It's healthy.
Yeah.
Mentally, I think it's a healthy thing to do, to dissociate from, not dissociate because that's not, but
Sure.
to get to step away from the day to day every now and then is okay.
Yeah, and to enter into that, like you said, the magic circle space where you can play with things that you would not normally play with, like ideas, concepts, identities that you would not normally get to play with in your everyday life.
Yeah, so we talk about flow, the psychological state of flow, as being like one of the pinnacle states of being that you can come into, where you are so engaged in something that you lose sense of time, like you lose track of time. And that flow state's really important because that is a time of optimal engagement, which means that you're learning more, you're expressing yourself well, everything is great within there. It's not too boring for you, it's not too anxiety provoking for you. It's like Baby Bear, it's like just right. And so games, a well-designed game can actually promote flow experiences, right? That's the goal, is to allow you to pass time in a way that is so engaging that you don't recognize that time has passed. Right. And that's really, I think, my bread and butter as a game designer is to try to do that in all games. Is like, I don't want you to think about your phone. Like you should at the end of, I know I've played a good game, to be honest. Like I know I've played a really good game if I don't have a picture of it.
Because you didn't even think to pick up your phone and take
I did not think to pick up I did not think to pick it up and take a picture because I was so engaged during the whole thing that I forgot. I was so into it, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about all the stuff we're talking about is really kind of my oeuvre in gaming. It's like, okay, psychology and therapy and talk and games and even the martial arts stuff kind of gets linked in there in how I think about game design, and really actually more about mentorship and helping other people develop games and design games and work in games. A lot of my thought process does come from martial arts, but not from the fighty part of it, but from the how do we help people get better at skill? How do we do that? So I find a lot of my life sort of intertwines and finds its way into infecting everything that I do. So,
yeah, I'm really curious about designing for flow, like you were saying. I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons in a while, so I think like for years, like I Dungeons and Dragons was the main game I played, like especially early in my gaming, right? And so like my memory of those games and my impression of playing back then was very much like, okay, so it's so and so's turn. I've got a solid 10 minutes before it's my turn again. I can kind of check out. I can kind of like, or I can get up and get snacks. I can, maybe while I wasn't on my phone back then, like it would be now, but that kind of thing. And so I'm curious, like how that's my D&D memory, and I didn't really think about. So now I don't play D&D almost at all. I play many other RPGs, and so thinking about like Masks as an example, it doesn't feel that way. So I'm just curious about designing for flow and like how you design for that.
Less tables to roll on. and a lot less things about encumbrance and the minutia of stuff like somatic components and verbal components and material components in a spell. So all that stuff, like honestly, I don't know why we did it way back when, but that minutia was kind of cool,
right?
when you're reading about it, but not very cool when you were playing it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean I can't cast a spell? I've memorized it. Yeah, but sorry, you ran out of all those mushrooms that you were supposed to use to cast that spell. It's like, okay, I don't want to play that. But that's the game. But it's not. It doesn't have to be. Yeah, but it's in my game. It is, right? So like encumbrance drives me batty. A lot of stuff drives me batty about D&D as written, right? Rules is written, but I think modern dungeon masters have become so much better at really creating a free-flowing game where people are involved much longer, and they are, not necessarily rolling all the time, but they're involved all the time. Just even the idea of a concept like spotlighting was revolutionary. It doesn't sound revolutionary, but it
Right.
is. Like, just ensure that each of your players has enough of the spotlight during the game. Not too much, not too little, and they're all participating. That's all we really want as a good GM. When I was learning, I don't even know I was learning how to GM, but when I was trying to get
Mm-hmm.
more into that style of like, oh, okay, gotta make that, I would actually have paper in front of me behind the screen where it was like, I would kind of mark how many times people talked, not just talked out loud, but when I would ask them to do something, I would say, okay, Ben has made a roll, and then I would let other people make rolls before Ben got to make another roll, right? That kind of thing, where it's very procedural, but it taught me how to kind of get into that mode of making sure. So, I think designing for flow is really teaching good group management behaviors for a,
Yeah.
a game master in a lot of ways. But then the game itself can be designed in those ways where a person can't dominate the table because they literally can't. Powered by the Apocalypse games, because you play masks, is a great example of how niche protection in a playbook
Right.
means that nobody else can do that thing for a long time anyways, until they can pick a move from another playbook,
Sure.
which is really cool, but sometimes ruins the vibe. So in most PBTA games, you can't choose the same playbook as another player, right? Whereas in D&D, you could literally have a party of, 4 rogues and 3
Sure.
magic users. And now everybody's hiding in shadows, right? I had a friend just the other day, because we were talking about niche protection, and he was playing a rogue in a game, and he said, yeah, the other day when I was in a session, one of the other players, the GM gave them a cloak of invisibility. And as soon as he heard the word cloak of invisibility, his heart sank, because he's like, oh, that was my thing. That was the one thing I could do better than everybody else, which was hide in shadows and sneak on people, right? And now there's somebody who can do that just because they got a freaking cloak. So it kind of ruined the game for him in a way, right? Whereas in games that are very niche protected, if you are the beacon in masks, you are the only one who has drives, right? Which makes you do funny things, but they're great storytelling, drivers, right?
Yeah.
Which is why they're called drives, by the way. And yes, later on, in like maybe after somebody gets enough experience, they could pick that too. But a lot of people stay away from the things that really define a character,
Right.
and go for the more subsidiary little itty bitty parts, moves, and whatnot. So I think that creates flow in and of itself, because and that's why I like storytelling games a lot, because if it's a good game between the GM and the team, the GM will make sure that there are things that the beacon can't solve, but that the bull can, or that the bull can't solve this, but the outsider can, right? Or whatever, right? Alien technology. Oh, that's the outsider's thing, but alien technology that is this big, brutish, cyber armor. Oh, okay, now the bull might get involved, right? So there's all sorts of ways to be a good GM to get that involved. But from design, from the top-down perspective of a designer, niche selection is a great way to do that, where you don't let people duplicate, so that everybody has space within this 3-hour period to actually shine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing I like. Brandon wrote that in the book. The GM needs to be the biggest fan of the players,
Yes.
right?
Yes. One of my favorite. I love that. I love
That
that
is like
line.
my
Yeah.
favorite line,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, oh yeah, it's like I'm reading a comic book, and I want my favorite characters, who are these 5 people, to do the cool stuff all the time. So let them do it, make them do it, give them scenarios where they'll do cool things, um, and pace it out so it's not just one person. So it's not always combat, because then the bull's going to shine, right? Or it's not always interdimensional space villains, because then the outsider's going to shine. Or make sure it's not always magic, 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 because then the doomed will shine, right? So we want to make sure that it's a good mix of all those things, or none of those things, like things that aren't specifically keyed to a character, so that anybody can do it. So a good mix of all that kind of stuff is really, really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of other design things to create flow in a board game, you can do this a little bit easier. So flow is basically the statement that my skills and the challenge are aligned. Skills and challenge are aligned.
Mm.
And we see that in something like in Dungeons and Dragons, where we see like challenge levels, right? Or what are they called in D&D? I think the challenge levels. Can't remember.
Oh, like
the actual term is.
like challenge rating, like
Yeah, CRs.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So if there's a challenge rating of a monster, how does that line up against your heroes? If you have too low of a challenge rating, it's boring as sin, right? It's super boring. If it's too challenging, it's like, that's a TPK. We're all going to die. This is no fun.
Yeah.
So the most fun stuff is when the challenge and the skill level of the players are kind of in alignment. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. Sometimes it's a little more. Yeah, we give them a good beating, but it was a worthy beatdown, right? If you're a fan of wrestling, like the best fights are when it's back and forth, not when it's one-sided. Those aren't fun. But when or if you're just below the skill level of the challenge, then when you do beat them, it feels like epic, right? But when you feel so beat down, like, yeah, we ran into an adult blue dragon and we're level 1. Like, what's going on, DM? What are we doing? We should prevent that kind of stuff, because we should prevent our players from unnecessarily running into challenges that will, obviously kill them. So anyway, I think a lot of like things like that. So tools that you have on hand to help you build adventures that are scaled to your players' skill levels and their what they like to do is good. In board games, so oftentimes in board games you have like more skills that you gain as characters. It's really important that the challenge of the game increases procedurally with that, right? And so in role-playing games, it's easier because the GM just says, oh, yeah, they just have more hit dice or whatever, or they have more hit points, and this makes it harder. In something where there's no GM, the game has to decide that for you. And so there is a lot of, especially in like campaign games where you have characters that increase over time, over multiple games, it's more like a GM type situation. But then the game designer just has to kind of lay it out. This is where I expect them to be. This is where I expect them to be. And so in design, we'll basically have like a loadout for the different characters at different levels, and we'll test the different scenarios with those loaded out characters at different levels of skill. Like they should have this weapon by now, and they should have these skills by now. Okay, then let's play this scenario with that character that has all these things, see if it's well balanced, plus or minus a few points here, and go. So scenario building is hard, campaign building is hard, but it's actually in some ways not as hard as stuff that ends in one game. So for example, a lot of games, as you get more and more towards the end of a game, you have more money, you have more resources, you have more all this stuff to do things. The challenge of the game itself, if it's an engine that pushes back on you, should meet that. It should be like, okay, now in the 4th round, the things cost more to build, right? We shouldn't want to build any of these small little rinky-dink buildings. We should have to build these big giant skyscrapers now because we have the resources to do them. And some games will just take out they'll say, no, you cannot build small buildings anymore. They're just gone,
Mhm.
right? Tier one buildings are no longer
Right.
available to prevent people from like broken strategies or just sinking their stuff into stuff that isn't going to win them the game either
Mhm.
way, right? Either it's too powerful or it's too weak. And so you can do that through game design, through like saying, what's available. So you can scale up a game with the players and what their resources should be.
Mm.
And so in doing that, we're really just looking at expected outcomes. What's my resource allotment at this time supposed to be? What should I be spending it on, or what could I be spending it on? And a lot of that is done through like scoring mechanisms, right? So when you're designing a game, like a board game, specifically board games are more like this than free-flowing RPGs. In a board game, what you're really doing is you're using like operant conditioning. So you're saying, hey, I want you to behave a certain way, and I'm going to reward you with points if you do this, right? So you might say, build a skyscraper and you get 10 points. Build a shopping mall and you get, 8 points. And then you have to really scale that down and say, okay, how much does a shopping mall cost versus how much does a skyscraper cost? And the cost, the 2-point difference, what is the difference there? And what are some other parameters around there? But the idea of your skill or your availability of resource, or what cards you should have in play by then, what tableau you might have built in front of you that has like different, in this case, we're building a city, you might have different tools or different politicians or whatever available to you to do these things. The things that you're doing can't be easy. Otherwise, the game's no fun.
Mm-hmm.
They can't just be instantaneously, yeah, I've done that. I can do that automatically. That's not really a challenging, fun game. It's just like, yeah, I'll do that thing. And you're just mashing a button again, right? Like
sure. Right.
Mashing buttons. You want people to think, how can they creatively overcome the problem in front of them with the resources they have at hand, right? And every turn should be kind of like that.
Yeah.
You don't want people just auto cruising through everything. That's not really fun.
Have you played? I just played a game that I thought did all that really, really well. But I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. But it's a deck building, it's a deck builder and a like resource management and like a worker placement game where you play it's like an Indiana Jones type game. You like are
is it Ruins of Arnak?
That's it. Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
I just played that for the first time, and I thought it did all that like really, really well. Like it.
Yeah, like the ramp up of what you're expected to do by the end of the game versus what you're supposed to do at the beginning of the game, and then what you have at the end of the game. That's that idea, is like you're constantly engaged in it.
Yeah.
So that's what keeps people in the flow, right?
Yeah.
Right, because it's not too easy that you just say, yeah, I guess I do it. It's not too hard that you say, I'm going to leave, and you flip the table and go, right?
It's interesting because with board games, I naturally think of like, yes, I love when board games have a ramp where in the beginning of the game, I'm learning the game. The game knows I'm learning how to play it, so it eases me in. It teaches me how to play by being simpler at the beginning and ramping up to being more complicated as the game goes. I have not really thought about RPG design that way before. Like the idea of like that kind of a ramp. I mean, of course, with like leveling or something, I suppose you have that.
Yeah,
but I never really thought about it in that same sort of way of like.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot more freedom in an RPG as a GM to just like fudge stuff on the way, right? It's like, oh, okay, in this encounter, in this module that I've bought, it says it's going to be, 3 goblins. I'm going to make it 2 bugbears because our characters are a little more powerful than the characters, the level that it was set for, or something like that. But I still think the whole story is cool. So I'm just going to redo that, convert it, right? And then you get games like, Funnel World and whatnot, where you're just basically killing all of your level 0 characters to figure out which level 1 character you're going to be.
Right.
Those are interesting because it keeps it set at a very specific level of challenge, right? And your characters don't grow. There's a whole bunch of interesting stuff that happens. I think because there's more participation and more maybe creativity and expression in an RPG, we can not get away with, but we don't have to put as much necessarily design thought into the flow of it, because naturally it will kind of happen, right? Through play, because people want to tell the stories. People want to interact with people. But again, they need to have the ability to have some success and not success, right?
Right.
So when you think about RPGs, all they are participatory stories, not self, but co-created stories that are uncertain.
Right.
That's it, right? That's boiling it down. That's what RPGs kind of are. And all we're doing when we are leveling up is we're making things more certain to happen. So if we want to do good design, we need to make things more certain to happen because the players are getting better at them. And so our monsters or the bad people have to kind of suppress that certainty, right? Or present them with odds that lower their odds. Or if they do fail, that the repercussions are fairly severe, right? So there's those two kind of things that run counter to each other. So what is the challenge from the game? What are the skills of the player? And if the skills of the player are such that, yeah, I have a +5 Vorpal blade that I hit on anything from above a 10, I'm probably going to hit you. You're like, okay, so a +5 Vorpal blade, and he's hitting 50% of the time. And all right, Tarask, we're fighting a Tarask now, right? Because if you're doing on average, so, you're going to do with a +5 longsword, right? I don't know, maximum of 17, 18 points of damage, whatever. So average probably 6 to 17 points of damage. How long do you want the combat to be? How down to the wire do you want this to be? Should this be literally a coin flip that is just played out over many periods? It should be favored in one way and in another way. So there's a lot of balancing that goes on in a GM's head when they're designing a level or designing a module for play. And I find that a lot of the very mechanical systems, like say D&D, which is quite mechanical.
Yeah.
That I find that's probably why those systems do have that kind of, we got to go figure that out. Like we were going to spend 5 minutes figuring something out. Like, how many dice do you roll? Oh, well, I'm this level and it's on this terrain. And, I did this. And, oh, by the way, this cleric blessed me. So I think 17 dice. You're like, oh, okay, well, okay, 6. I think you have 16 dice. Now we go argue for about 2 more minutes about how many dice you get to roll. But I find role-playing systems that are simpler keep people in the flow a little bit more, because you're not going to go reference your tomes.
Sure.
Right. I have tomes over there of D&D stuff from like all the way from like chainmail up. And I hate it. I hate referencing that stuff as a GM. It makes me feel like I don't know the game in some ways. I'm flustered while I'm looking for them. I would just rather play Masks or Apocalypse World or something where it's like all on your playbook. It's literally right there, right? And all as a GM I have my list. Here it is. I have a list of hard moves, I think, on my table. Oh, it's underneath a bunch of other stuff. I can't lift it. I'll make it. But yeah, that's all I have is a list of hard moves over there. But all the other moves,
right?
And I know. And it's like, what dice do we use? Oh, only D6s.
Right.
So I know exactly which dice we're using. So yeah, I find simpler systems better for me personally, because I don't need that crunch anymore.
Right.
When I was younger, I liked the crunch a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that was because I was trying to figure out systems as a designer, as a person who was thinking about design, and let's like, think how juicy and cool this is. But I was just listening to John Gilmore and Doug Lewandowski talk about Kids on Bikes today on a different podcast, because Doug said, you got to go listen to this podcast. It's really cool. It just happened to be about him. But it was a cool podcast. It's a podcast in which they talk about with a movie critic and a gamer about movies
Okay.
and gaming.
Okay.
And
That's
so
cool.
it's a really interesting. It's what is it?
I was
Never
gonna
Say
say,
Die.
I was gonna
Never
say,
Say
what's
Die, the
this
podcast.
podcast? Yeah, I'll have to find it. Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds awesome.
yeah, the Never Say Die podcast, and
Okay.
it's really cool. And I think the episode with Doug and John is the first one that they've ever had game designers on. So that might be the one to listen to.
Sure.
Anyway, the point of it being that, you know, Kids on Bikes essentially is an homage to D&D in a lot of ways, but it strips things down and takes things out and just like says things like, okay, what do you have in your backpack? Because anybody who's playing this understands that, you know, a kid's backpack can only fit so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like, what's the limit of that backpack? Yeah, I don't think that would fit. Yeah, you're right. Me either. Like a camping stove, you're not going to fit that. A whole jerry can of fuel, probably not something that a kid would carry around. You know, a trapper keeper with paper and pens and a, you know, a switchblade that you stole from your older brother. Yeah, you can have that. Right. So, you know, just intrinsically what fits in your encumbrance level. There's no like, this weighs exactly this many gold pieces worth of stuff. Right. And so getting more abstract, I think, allows us to tell better stories in some ways.
Do you
When
play?
we get so specific,
Yeah.
like D&D, like this is how many gold this weighs. This is how many gold turns into
Sure.
electrum, turns into silver. It's like,
Right.
oh, why do I care? I don't care.
Some people do, but I was
Oh,
gonna.
yeah, that's the thing.
I mean, I was gonna say, do you
If
play?
that's the game that you want,
Right.
excellent. Play that game.
Do you play Elden Ring? Are you playing Elden Ring? Like everybody seems to be.
No.
Okay. Well,
so
yeah.
I know this about myself, and this
Sure.
is why I don't do this. And it's funny. So another designer today said, I have taken Magic the Gathering Arena off of my phone because I've not made a game in like a year and a half because of it. Like basically they haven't got anything published. And he's like very honest. It's like, yeah, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I did the same thing with Star Realms. I would play like 30 games of Star Realms at a time every day. And it's like, I have like something like 9,000 games of Star Realm logged.
Yeah.
And when you think that each of those games in totality probably took about, 15 to 20 minutes, holy cow, that's a lot of time that I spent playing that game, which is totally fine. And it fed a need or filled a need at that time. But I realized like, oh, I need to spend more time on, that or with my family or eating food or whatever it is.
Oh no, that was me in Ascension for a while. I was playing Ascension on the app and I was in like, 15 simultaneous games and like I was also playing against computer at night, like just for fun and like it was an addictive quality, you know what I mean? And but
and so I know that about myself. Yeah. So Elden Ring is out for me.
I can hear
and Triangle Strategy is out for me right now. So those are like I'm more interested in Triangle Strategy, to be honest, because I like that style. I like tactical games. I'm not so big on action. But so I have, 2 months of vacation because I'm a professor. So I'll be off for May, June, and I will maybe get one of those then. But also maybe not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, the reason why I brought up Elden Ring specifically is that like it as being as like hard, it's a super difficult game and you have to like really, really learn it and all that. Like encumbrance, not an issue, right? Like a game like that you would expect like encumbrance because everything is hard in it, right? But they know that doesn't matter. They know that nobody wants to have to worry about that, right? So they like you have a I forget what it's called. You have like you have something that you can stick items into. It's limitless, so you can fill it with as much as you want. If you don't need to access it all the time, you put it in there, and it's just you can care. So you can have like one of every item in the game, and there's no reason not to. And that's more fun. Like there's not like why like I love Fallout. That's one of my favorite games of all series of all time. I hate encumbrance in that game. I hate it. It makes me so mad when I have to worry about what I'm carrying. Now I get it. Some people that maybe is what they want. I saw someone recently on a thread about RPGs talking about like how they didn't understand narrative games because like physics doesn't seem to make any sense in narrative game world. Like, don't people care about physics in these games? Like, it's not realistic, so why would I play it?
No.
And like, I just completely different way of thinking than my way of
Yeah,
thinking about games.
which is totally legitimate for
Yeah.
them, and like it's
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, then don't play those,
Right.
but also don't poo poo people who want to play those types
Sure.
of games. Like when I say I hate encumbrance, if you like encumbrance,
Right.
go
Sure.
encumber yourself.
Yeah.
That's totally up to you.
I don't get that person, but hey, I guess someone
Well,
out there
exactly.
really
Like I
wants
don't
to cover.
I don't personally understand it, but I do understand like the idea of wanting to simulate something.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
simulationists versus gamers, that's actually two separate things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you really want to simulate what it would have been like in the Vietnam War, and you can only carry like one RPG, a grenade, two clips for your gun, go ahead, count all that ammo, do that. But most of the time, most of the people I play with want to be like action heroes. They want to tell cool stories.
Yeah.
And if that means they had one more bullet in their gun than legally could have been in there by realistic capacity of a magazine, I'm going to give that to them.
So
I'm not counting.
right. So a fun way I've seen this done that isn't applicable all the time, but works in this one scenario of a friend who loves to run Dread. He's an amazing Dread designer, a Dread GM.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I freaking love Dread. So he would play by the rule of like basically reasonable things you might have as a Dread character, like your character has. But if you want like that extra bullet, or if you want to have some item that maybe, do you have that item? I don't know. That seems like maybe it's a little bit, it's a uncertainty principle there.
Yeah.
He would offer it as a pull from the tower, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's a hard choice, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can have that, but you need to make a pull.
Oh,
and somebody with real steady hands is like, yeah, I'll make that pull, and then die.
Right.
But yeah, and the other thing so I like things like Blades in the Dark, which don't think about that at all. What you have in Blades in the Dark, if you've ever played it, is a loadout sheet, and you have a limit of number of boxes that you can click over the course of your mission, your adventure, your whatever. And because it's done in this really cool kind of Ocean's 11 retcon style, it's like, yeah, don't you remember when I packed that?
I love that.
That suit of armor or whatever I have. And I took
that.
3 encumbrance boxes, but I have it. So things like that, where it's not like mathematical encumbrance, but it's like limited to how much you can carry based on, how many slots you have or the size of your backpack. I think that's what I like, where there's some limit, but it's not so like fiddly that I need a spreadsheet to count it, right?
Sure.
And I like that a lot for a lot of these games that we're talking about. Like, so one of my favorite things about Blades is that you're right in there. It's like, okay, how do you want to enter this scene? Are you being aggressive? Are you being sneaky? What are you doing? How are you doing it? And all of a sudden you're playing. You don't plan, you play. And your plan gets kind of elucidated through the play. It's like, oh yeah, don't you remember when we planned to do that? And you mark down something. Don't you remember when I planned to put that, trap there? Mark down your trap was in there. And then the thing that I like about like Kids on Bikes is that you're spending that whole first session designing your players, but also co-creating the actual town that you're playing in. And then I like in Kids on Bikes that you're using all the D&D dice, but you're just doing it in a very different way. I think that's fun. Yeah. But exploding dice are cool. So it has the feels of an old school RPG without all of the trappings of an old school RPG that maybe you don't like as much, like rolling about tables and things like that, or every move that you make is a possible random encounter. Like that's okay when your primary mechanism of advancement is killing everything that you encounter. Then you want to encounter more stuff. But what if your primary enjoyment from a game is telling stories about relationships between people?
Right.
And then you don't want those encounters all the time because they get in the way of what is actually fun about this game for that group, right?
Yeah, so you make a game like Masks where like even the action scenes are all actually about the relationships or the dynamics at the table, like between the characters.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean, they should be.
Right. Right.
I know
Right. Right.
my players are very new role players, so
Yeah.
they tend to be more like punchy fighty.
Sure.
But they're slowly getting into, oh, if I can insult you, that'll actually make you hit harder. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're realizing, like, if I yell at you to do something and you decide to follow through with it, you'll actually do better at it or whatever. So they're getting there. Um, it's such a neat system. Like, I love masks, particularly because as a developmental psychology professor, it's very, very true to like adolescent
Mm-hmm.
development. It's like, yeah, anything somebody says about you will probably affect your outcomes, because that's just how impressionable a lot of teenagers are, even superpowered or not. And I thought it was fascinating when I first read the book. It's like, what do you mean your stats aren't like static?
I know.
What do you mean they change?
So
Oh, they're
good.
not stats. Oh, that's why.
Exactly.
They're
It's
labels.
brilliant. It's
Right? So
it's
just wrapping
honestly
your head around that. Yeah.
it's honestly
Yeah.
brilliant. Like I just am often at awe at how brilliantly designed it is. Like it's so smart. And like my favorite thing I think about masks is pushing players labels, right? Like so trying to like
Yeah.
get them to have an adult um try to get them to see the world the way they do, or see themselves, I mean, and how they relate to the world the way they do. And like that idea of like, it is a little bit, I've had to sort of like help people who I have as players like understand how that works. They're like, oh, but he's trying to move my label that direction. And I say, yeah, because he or she wants you to see yourself the way they see yourself. So it's not that
Yeah.
they want you to be more what's the one dangerous or whatever,
Dangerous,
like
yeah.
danger. It's
But
not that
they
they
see you as
they
dangerous.
see you as dangerous. Getting people to
So
understand
maybe
that.
you
Yeah.
see yourself
Mhm.
as dangerous. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting because that does play very heavily into like self-worth and all these
Mm,
types of things that we talk about
mm,
in psychology, about how you perceive yourself.
mm.
How do you understand who you are? A lot of it is only through the impressions of others, right? Which is what masks really, really tapped into very well. In my favorite genre of comic books, pretty much is angsty teenagers. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And New Mutants and Teen Titans, they're my jam. So
Nice.
there you go.
Nice. Nice. How old are your kids, by the way? You mentioned your kids.
Ethan is 18, turning 19, and Eli is 14. He'll
So
be
they're
15 like in January next year.
so they're right in that age range. They are
Oh
math,
yeah, they're
the math
completely in
characters.
that age range, and then they both love, like, they're like, Ethan is like, Young Justice is the best thing ever, right?
Nice.
He loves Young Justice, and Eli not so much. Eli's not into comics and cartoons as much as his brother is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
he's more into like history. He loves history, like Crusader Kings 3. He loves like historical wargaming, and so every time he'll come upstairs and goes, "Dad, did you know that the Habsburgs were?" And like, it's like, what? He's telling me about like the Austro-Hungary progression of lineage and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, that's
Oh, I
cool.
did. I did not know that, but now I do. Very cool, son. So yeah, yeah. They learn from their gaming at least. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Are either of them into Avatar?
oh yeah. They both love Avatar.
Are they like
both love
super
Korra.
hyped that you design stuff for related to Avatar?
So here's the thing:
Yeah.
my kids think I'm the biggest nerd in the world. They're probably right. They're probably right. But every now and then, I get a call from Ethan. It's like, "Dad, what game of yours can we buy so that my friends can play it?" And it's like, "Oh, well, why don't you try this one? Like Scooby Doo, like the
Yeah. Yeah.
escape room in a box." Like, "Oh yeah, I'll get that," because they'll know what Scooby Doo is, right? And so he's less. He thinks that the games that I make that aren't licensed are, they're all right and everything. He's like, "Well, I don't know why you're doing that,"
Yeah.
which is super funny. But I'll tell you in a second. But the ones that are licensed, he's like, "Yeah, I guess that's okay." But he's a huge Star Wars fan, so if I ever get a Star Wars license, he'll be like, "Oh, okay, now you're legit." But yeah, like they're actually in canon in Korra, in the world of Korra, because their names are used as
Oh,
characters.
cool.
So
That's
yeah, it's quite
awesome.
funny. Yeah, and they helped me write adventures for kids on bikes as well.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, because they're kids. So I asked them questions like, so if you were in this town, where would you go? It's like, oh, I go here. All right, that's where they go then. Okay, good.
That's
Um,
that's smart. Yeah,
they're kids. They have bikes. They know what they're
exactly.
doing.
Yeah. So what do you want to do
Um,
with it? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, they Ethan plays role playing games and he loves Root and Oath. Like he's a big
Nice.
fan of leader games.
Nice.
And so yeah, I mean, when I show him all my weird little books, like he's like, okay. But when I show him like the big ones, like that are based on licenses, he's like, okay, I get that. That's pretty cool, Dad. And I think as he gets older, he's more willing to say that I'm cool. Eli is not still not willing to say that I'm cool. But yeah, I mean, we just did an X-Men game and things like that. So who knows? Who knows how cool they think I am?
I mean, X Men is
I
pretty awesome. I mean, if they don't think X Men's cool,
yeah,
I don't know. That's
yeah, they will one day when they get older, they're gonna realize just how cool their dad is.
we can all tell ourselves that as parents, right?
Yeah,
Um,
we all tell ourselves, but
yeah.
maybe not.
What is the X Men game?
Oh, so the X-Men game is actually a re-look. So it's not really a reskin of a Dungeons and Dragons game that we made a while ago. So it's called Rock Paper Scissors was the
Yeah.
Rock Paper Wizards was the Dungeons and Dragons game.
Right.
And the X-Men one is Rock Paper Heroes.
Oh, cool.
And the X-Men are caught in the danger room and they want to, win the training session. And so they're using their mutant powers to basically turn off the danger room and avoid the traps in the danger room.
Mm.
That's basically it. Is the same idea of running towards the end goal and avoiding the trap areas. So in Rock Paper Wizards, there was no traps. There was each other. You'd basically get hit by each other. But because in the X-Men don't really fight each other unless they've been mind controlled, and that's no fun. But they don't really fight each other. Even in training, they really fight the danger room.
Right.
Like the danger room will have like mini sentinels and like razor blades and rotating knives that come down at them and missiles that launch at them. They're always blunt missiles, by the way, if you ever look at the art, or nets that fire out of the wall. And so we made the game so they don't fight each other. So the moves are never like punch and kick. They're like block and push out of the way because I'm being heroic. Like I'm pushing you out of the way so that I, Colossus can stand here and absorb that with my armor. That's the way the framing is done, other than fighting each other. Whereas the WWE one that we did and the Dungeons and Dragons one that we did, it's like, yeah, it can be PvP because that's what would happen. So the danger room has different areas of the map that every turn change, and that area of the map is now a trap. If you get caught in there, bad things happen, and if bad things happen, you're more likely to lose the game. So every time we reuse the basic finger flinging mechanic that we have from Rock Paper Wizards, we add or change something. And for the danger room is that the danger room fights back. Because before, the dragon never really fought back. It was after you slayed the dragon, you're dividing up the treasure. And in Money in the Bank, which was the WWE one, it was more about you fight each other because you're wrestlers. And climbing to the top of the ladder to get the money, and then using tools from outside the ring, like a table or a ladder, to attack somebody. So this was a little different because we were like, canonically, we don't want the X-Men to fight each other. That doesn't look great.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right. So,
yeah.
Like, unless we made like a Civil War
right.
version with like the Avengers, and we'd have, but then who fought who? And,
yeah.
So as a big fan of all these properties that I've ever worked on, like I've pretty much, for Scooby-Doo, it's like I've watched every single Scooby-Doo cartoon ever that exists in the world. Yeah. Before I ever made the game. Like I'm a huge Scooby-Doo fan, and I've read X-Men for I don't know, 50 years, probably almost. I'm 50 years old, so I've read them for almost as long as I've been alive. So like I know the canon, I know what it is, and it's hard for me to break out of canon a lot. even in a game, just because I know fans like myself will probably call me on these little breaks. Like even with the art, my friend who's another big comic nerd said that that costume's like 7 generations old. Yeah, but I didn't do the art, Tim. Don't worry about that. I said also Jubilee is in the game and she's not a vampire, so what then, Tim? What then? Right? So I know that comic book fans can be
Yeah.
pretty pedantic at times.
Yeah,
So
right, of course.
I want to avoid that as much as possible. But you're not gonna always capture it within a game that has not a lot of story to it, right? That makes people understand why these people are doing what they're doing. So you kind of have to hit them at like the base level. X-Men are heroes. Heroes shouldn't fight each other. Let's go. They're in the danger room. This is where they train. That's it, right? So yeah, that's kind of the X-Men game.
Cool.
It has it's very short, right? So it's like, maybe a 35 to 45 minute game. So, and it's very random because you're just like picking a thing and throwing your fingers at people saying, you're going to get clawed by Wolverine or whatever, right? I'm doing my special move. I'm Wolverine or Cyclops. And when you do that and you introduce all that randomness, the flow experience doesn't come from the game itself. It comes from the players in that case, a lot of times, right? And it's over so fast that, does your skill have to rise with the challenge? Well, your challenge is the other players versus like a scenario-based one where the challenge is set by the designers. That becomes a little bit more difficult to actually to stage up and to get that flow going.
Yeah. So, oh man, I'm curious, like working with IPs that you love, like you know what that's like, and I'm wondering, like, especially when you get to like, so there's like caring for canon, like you're kind of just describing, but there's also like when you get to add to canon for like something that you like is a license that you already love. Like, what is it like working with stuff that you're already a fan of?
It's wonderful. It's like it is. It's like it's the dream come true, I think, for most designers.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting because financially it's not the greatest in a lot of ways. Unless it is, right? So that's the thing, right? So when you pay out for a license as a publisher, you're paying a big chunk of money, especially if it's a major license like Batman or Avatar or whatever.
Yeah.
You're paying in like the tens of thousands of dollars up front. And then the company like Viacom or Warner Brothers or whoever gets a percentage. And because they get a percentage, the designers usually get less. So, IP games, you get less of a percentage per game, but the idea is that these games will get printed and sold in larger volumes because they have better brand recognition straight out of the gate. And there are people who will buy anything that has Batman on it just because it's Batman or whatever. Right. And there are, it's true. But usually what happens is that they play out pretty okay in the end of things. The problem is with IP games is that the publisher may not view this as a product that they want to continue to publish because they can't afford the IP anymore, or they don't have access to the IP anymore, or they only had it for a certain period and it's done and they don't want to renew it because it wasn't that profitable for the amount of money or the amount of work that went into it. So there's been some games that have only had one print run. For example, Legend of Korra, Pro Bending Arena was one of those. It only had one print run. It did very well on Kickstarter, but apparently not well enough for IDW to want to do that. And since IDW folded, it's like, okay, so now who has the license for Korra? Would they want to still do this? Do they want something new?
Yeah.
What do they want? Which is sad in a way because we put so much love and effort into that game that it's like, it should still exist somewhere for fans of the show. And it's funny because fans of the show, there are more fans of the show now than there were when the show was actually on.
Oh yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
And same thing with Avatar because of streaming services like Netflix.
Oh, absolutely.
Where people who grew up watching that show are now watching it with their kids.
That's me.
Right?
Exactly. That's what I was just thinking. Yeah, my kids are now finding it. Like, you know what I mean? Like like my kids are huge fans of Avatar. They just
Yeah.
watched it for the first time. They're, my kids are 11, 10,
Yeah.
and 5. And so,
Yeah.
they're new fans because they're only now old enough and they adore it. They like fell in love with this, franchise.
Yeah. And the thing about Avatar and Korra specifically, they were actually made in a way to grow up with, right? Because it's like
Mhm.
when Avatar first aired, and then when Korra first aired, the people who watched Avatar would have grown up to the point that the stuff that was happening in Korra would make sense to them, right? Because Korra is much more mature; it's quite darker in tone, and the the thing now, well, even the thing back then is that there was not a lot of fan service, if you want to call it that, where there's not a lot of stuff. There really just isn't a lot of merch
Yeah.
that is licensed for either of those properties.
Right.
There were some toys in the beginning for Avatar, but not really. And so now we get this, RPG that just blew up in
Yeah.
terms of funding.
A little bit.
And it was wonderful. It's wonderful to be a
Yeah.
part of it. But part of the reason is because people just have wanted this for so long and nothing ever existed. And we know that there's going to be a large percentage of those people who will never play the game. They just want it.
Yeah.
They want to read the books because
Yeah.
they're very much source books, like canonically sourced books. I was just looking at the wiki for Avatar because of something, and so a lot of talk on the wiki is now, looks like we're gonna have to change some things because of the RPG. Because the RPG is actually like canonically the truth.
Right.
Right. And it's so funny
Right.
that a world as developed as the world of Avatar doesn't have a show Bible. In the same way that lots of other places do. So it's just really interesting. Yeah. Or one that we have access to anyways. I'm sure it has something, but we never had something. They're like, just go to the wiki.
Interesting.
It's good. Yeah, lots of places they use their wiki and they curate that so that it is not untruthful. But a lot of things don't have the full truth because they never developed it fully.
Yeah.
So there is no truth to it.
Sure.
Right? In some ways, it's like it could be anything.
Right.
Hey, can it be this? Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was funny. Like we had wanted to work on Avatar a long time ago, and we had wanted to do an Avatar RPG back when IDW had the license. And at the time, Viacom wanted nothing to do with RPGs because they were like, we don't have anybody on staff who understands them. We don't want to have to copy edit like 50,000 words. We don't want to do any of that. So no. It's like, okay. And then this comes along and it's just much different world out there now.
Yeah.
And this is like maybe just like 5 or 6 years. It's not like decades. But I think what's happening is that we're seeing a new revolution in RPGs. And so I'm sure you might know this, but WotC has basically posted the best years of their existence.
Okay.
In terms of money and income through Dungeons and Dragons over the pandemic, because so many people who had thought about doing this nerdy thing, well, that's all that's left is this nerdy thing because I can't go play sports and I can't go out to the bars and whatnot. So how about that nerdlinger thing that the nerds do? Let's do that nerdy thing. Oh, you mean Dungeons and Dragons? Yeah. Let's do that. And so now there's like tons and tons of people who are doing exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
Talking over Zoom, but playing games while they're doing it. And so many people that never had played RPGs, this is their first experiences, Dungeons and Dragons through Roll20 and D&D Beyond and whatnot on a virtual tabletop. That is their first experience with it. And WotC has posted great numbers, like record-breaking numbers, because of people want this kind of content.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's definitely part of it that is due to the popularity of actual plays and obviously Critical Role and stuff that are making it look real fun and look really good. So
right, yeah, it definitely helps. I think it's definitely contributing to this moment.
This is 100% like the golden age of.
That's wild, RPG. Isn't it? Like, and here's what's crazy. So, like, if you had told me, I would never have believed you. Like, if you had told me, I just remember when 4th edition came out, and how like at that moment in time, you could have more easily convinced me that like Pathfinder was going to take over the fantasy RPG scene, and D&D was kind of going to retreat and not be as big. And you would have probably been able to convince me that that was the future way more readily than that we would enter into a new golden age of RPGs. D&D would be more popular than it's ever been before in its history, and it would be multi-million dollar like thing with basically TV devoted to it. And like I would just never have believed that. I would never have believed we were going to enter into this kind of golden age of RPGs. I think if you had told me that, I don't even know, 10 years ago, even yeah, I guess maybe like 10 years ago. I'm just trying to remember when I don't even remember when fourth edition came out. But which I have no I played fourth edition when it came out. I have no qualms with fourth edition. I have no hot takes on any of those things. But at that moment, like it just I would never have guessed that this would be the sort of future for RPGs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually just talked about fourth edition before I got on with you with somebody else.
Oh, really?
Because I was looking for um, umbrella terms for classes.
Mm.
So in D&D, as those of you who play D&D know, we've got like the 12 main classes from the player's handbook. But how do we boil them down into like maybe four groups? And which characters fall into those four groups? And my friend said, "Oh, why don't you go back to fourth edition,
right. Fourth edition
and go to like
right.
leaders and strikers and controllers and all that stuff?" It's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Except that I'm not sure if that'll fit what we want to do, but I like it. I just was talking about fourth edition with them, and we're like, yeah, fourth edition would have been a better game if it was not D&D.
That's exactly
like
it.
Not posed as Dungeons and
right.
Dragons, because it's really not as much about role playing as it is about tactical battle.
Right.
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 So it was like World of Warcraft wannabe-ish kind of thing. I feel it. But there's definitely some really cool stuff in fourth edition. So
really
there's nothing wrong with fourth edition unless you expect it to be an RPG. And then it's kinda, but not is it? I don't know.
It's a really interesting example of how like there's no reason it can't be, right? Like there's nothing keeping you from having a lot of role play in it. But it's a good example of how like what does the game focus on? And since it focuses on the rules of like combat, it makes you think of it like that's where then the game just naturally leads you. You could spend all that time role playing, but the game encourages this particular thing.
Yeah, all the bits and bobs that you had to like get for it are combat related, really. Right, which is another thing about like when we design a game, like what is the core experience? What do you want it to be? And does the brand fit that? Right, that was the thing for me. Is like, this is not my D&D. Get off my lawn type things. But if they had called it like D&D Tactics, I would have been all over it.
right.
Just mentally all over it.
Right.
But because it was sold as D&D 4th edition, it's like, that's too far of a leap for me. I'll stick with 3.5 or whatever, right? So, yeah, I just think it was like a misnomer in some ways. Names are important. Names matter. And so when you get things like Masks or Powered by the Apocalypse, where all the moves that you can do don't focus on combat. They're focused on like other things. That's what's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because it shapes a different story. It shapes a different game. And a lot of times those things that you're doing in a lot of the other games aren't actually to necessarily progress your own story, which is almost everything that you're doing in D&D is progress your own story, right? My individual story within this party is this, and I slayed this, and I put the dagger in this person's back, and I shot an arrow in that troll's eye, and blah 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 blah. I did that. But a lot of the moves that you'll see in like Powered by the Apocalypse games are like, involve another character in the scene, roll 2d6, check, pick 2 off the table. You and the player in your scene exchange a compliment with each other, and you get to shift their their stat by 1 or whatever. That's the kind of stuff that you'll see more and more in those types of games, which are not better or worse. They're just different. And I really like what you said about 4th edition. It's kind of like pushing you into combat.
Right.
it's almost as if there was nothing else.
Yeah.
But there was.
There
There's this
was.
whole other part of
Right.
role play that you could do.
You could do it. The game
but
just
they
yeah.
focus so much
Mhm.
on grid-based tactics that it's like, oh, well, I guess we're not doing that. No, you can. But look at this grid.
I feel like they kind of made it work by they released fifth edition, and then there are these like D&D board games, right? Like there's like the Castle Ravenloft board game, and there's like
Wrath of Ashardalon,
exactly
Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you get so like they can still so there's basically we can still do that tactical board game thing, and like you can and you can still have that niche, but it's not D&D. I mean, it is as a D&D, it's D&D esque or as a D&D license, I guess, or the D&D title on it, but it's not the game D&D.
Yeah, and so that's what we work on is a lot of those types of things where Rock Paper Wizards is a game set in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Like it has the money is the same money from Forgotten Realms.
Sure.
But it has nothing to do with role playing.
Right.
But it uses Magic Missile and it uses Stinking Cloud and it uses all the terms. Right. And then Fistful of Monsters has like the classic, D&D licensed monsters. So we didn't do like dragons, but we did like owl bears and displacer beasts, like the ones that are just so classically D&D. So there, I don't know if you know this, but there's only a few monsters that are actually D&D licensed monsters.
I was wondering about that. Yeah.
There's only a few. All the rest of them are like you can do them. You can use anybody could use those.
That's why I was just wondering.
Some of them are
saying
very
like,
much.
So which ones are licensed? Is there any good examples of like this one is D&D and you have to license it?
Oh, like I'm pretty sure like the Githyanki and those types.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think Hooked Horror is Rust Monster, Displacer Beast.
Something like a Beholder, like is a Beholder? Like,
yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Beholder's like their thing, right?
It's like
Mind Flayers are that type of stuff. I think gelatinous cubes might be either as well.
So
I have to think about it.
To think about like they own a monster. That's like such a weird.
I mean, they own the idea,
right? They own the idea of that monster is so fascinating. Well, so I like to sort of always ask someone towards at the end of the show, like what they're working on now. So, like, what are you working? Anything you're working on right now? Like, where's your energy going in design?
My energy should be going into marking papers, but it's not. My energy right now is going into making a Dungeons and Dragons game.
Okay. Interesting.
That is a thing. I can't talk too much about it.
Sure. I guess it should be what are you working on that you can talk about, right? That's probably
yeah. So Banana Chan and I have a game coming out. I'm not sure if it'll be on Kickstarter or if it'll be on something else just because of the whole blockchain thing.
Sure.
Through Exalted Funeral of Mork Borgie type stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a game called One Night Only, and it will be, I'm not sure when it's coming out, but it's a game about a garage band. Like you are a teenage high school garage band. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds so awesome. I love that.
Yeah. And you play your last gig and then you go off and go to college or get a job or whatever. And then the final scenes of the game are your high school reunion 20 years later and what happens.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So I love games that at the end of it, because I found all this stuff when I was going through my parents' basement and whatnot, like boxes and boxes of old maps that I had drawn when I was in math class, actually. Because when you're in math class, you get graph paper, and you get graph paper, you draw dungeons. That's what you do as a 14-year-old guy. So I have lots of dungeons and character sheets and stuff that I made when I was a kid. And I want a lot of my games to have that quality. And so I don't know what I was looking at. I was looking at something, and they were all like Dead Kennedys posters from the 80s and like Sex Pistols posters from England in the late 70s. And I'm like, what if we made a game about making a poster as a band? Like because they're all very DIY, like cut out pictures, photocopied so many times that it's like grainy and that's what you end up with.
Right.
As you're playing through the game, you make a poster about your band.
Freaking love that. It's so good.
Yeah, and then at the end of it, you have this, one night only, the iceberg lettuce heads. And you have your names, your characters are on there, and like on base, it's Charlie Smith, all this kind of stuff. And you'll have that at the end of the game to like photocopy for your friends or take pictures of and say, remember that game where we did this? That was so awesome. So I like artifacts in games.
Oh
So
yeah, me too.
and it's really weird. So it's Banana and I do this all the time. Jian Shim does this all the time. Shinyin Core does this all the time, where we're like, hey, create something.
Hmm.
They go a little bit extra and they're like,
Right.
hey, cross stitch.
Right.
Whereas Banana and I are like, let's draw pictures and
Yeah.
fold them up and make something out of that.
Yeah.
So we use a lot of that where we're like drawing on paper, like Exquisite Crime
Right.
is very much, using Exquisite Corpse from the surrealist movement of art, where you fold a piece of paper and I pass that around and everybody adds to it, and then we unfold it and we go, oh my God, that was the victim of the murder. What was his name? And blah, blah, blah. And we use that as a storytelling hook, but we co-created that. And I have friends who've played this and they keep their pictures close to them. Like literally, I asked my friend, hey, can you photocopy those for me or get me a photograph of them for the campaign? And she's like, oh, yeah, they're right here. What do you mean right here? They're on my desk. Keep them on my desk. Why do you keep them on your desk? Because I want them to be close to me, Sen. I love these pictures, she said. And she loves them. And like they are memories for her of our time together, right?
Yep.
And she was like, she's like, I'm gonna make a book out of them. Like I'm gonna a coffee table book out of them so I can look at them at any time. It's like,
that's
okay,
cool.
Julie, you go do that.
That's no, keepsakes from games like that are amazing. And
yeah,
like
and that's exactly what we call them, keepsake games, right? So.
Yeah, we had some academics on the show like a couple months back who were working on a paper for keepsake games. Came on and talked a lot extensively about the keepsake idea. I have the only keepsake I really have from a game is and I think I threw it away recently.
Oh no!
Which I know. I think I just threw it away. And it was I think it's the game To Serve Her Wintry Hunger from Stephen Dewey, who created 10 Candles.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's To Serve Her Wintry Hunger. You make a while you're playing, you make cuts in a snowflake. Like one of those snowflakes you learn how to make as a kid. And one of the things you do in the game is you make cuts, and the cuts are different depending on what happens in the story. And at the end of the game, you have a snowflake. And I had it in my office for years at the church, and I just had my office deep cleaned, and I was just cleansing like a lot of stuff, and I had too much stuff around. Actually, it's sort of for a geek, it's sort of like it's almost heartbreaking. I had like all my top of my desk in my office was all my Star Wars collectibles, and I had a ton of Disney collectibles on the other side of the room, and I had all this stuff around. And when they cleaned it, it felt wrong to have it, so I took all my Star Wars stuff down, and it's all in a box right now. I know, right? For a geek, it's like really hard. I gotta figure out a new way to present it somewhere else, but it just felt like the time for that to be out of my office was over. And instead, now I have like family pictures up there, and where the Star Wars collectibles were. But I'm pretty sure.
Now you're not the fun priest anymore.
Yeah, what
happened to that guy?
We could go into a whole therapy session about that, because this is definitely like a life change. Like I was saying about the martial arts at the beginning of the episode, I'm in a transition period of my life, and I feel like it's like a time I'm entering into a new phase of life. And I'm like, and I think doing that in my office was part of that. But yeah, I think I threw away the snowflake because I think I was like, I've had this and it's cool and it's a great memory, but like it's just now taking up a spot on my here on my desk that I don't need it to, and I'm pretty sure I threw it away. But it for a long time though, it was such a cool thing to have that memory item.
Yeah, and I mean you'll remember it.
Yeah,
that's all that really matters.
Yeah. I love that.
One thing that we love it when people pick up something and go, oh, I remember playing that.
Mm-hmm. So cool.
Yeah. So one of the games that we had was that I made with Alara Cameron, who I do a lot of board game design with. We made this game about it was a hard game. It was about separation of families at the border. So state-sanctioned separation of families at the border. And we have like a passport. Like it's what I use for every game that I make. It's a recipe card, like a 4x6 recipe card, and that's all you get. And you write down your character, and on that card, you're basically writing like memories of your of your childhood or your family or whatever. And then as the game progresses, you have to white that out or write over it with what is the most impactful memory from the last scene, and you write that, and you have to write it, and you're running out of room, and it's covering all this stuff. And at the end of the game, we ask you to look at the thing. It's like, what's the first thing that comes out? And everybody's like, I hate it here. That's what they wrote, or they were mean to me, or where's my mom? That comes out first, ahead of like, I had a great vacation at my grandma's farm last summer. And it's like really showing you that, hey, these experiences are horrible and they change your memories and they are psychologically damaging. So why are we doing that to children?
Yeah.
Right. That is my whole shtick about that whole crapshoot there. Right. Anyway, I've had friends find that in their luggage, like, a year later after we played it, and they like send me photos and they're like, I hated it and I loved it all at the same time. They're like, that's the hardest game I've ever played in my life, but I love that I did it. I will never do it again with you. Thanks for playing with me once, that kind of thing. It's like, my job here is done. I've done my job. I've shown you the horrors of that thing. And here's just a parting word of wisdom, because I didn't think about this when I was doing this particular game, but we had to be really aware as designers that we're not re-traumatizing people. When they pick up a game about a hard subject like racism or state-sanctioned separation or anything that could be potentially traumatizing. So oftentimes when we are trying to shed light on a difficult situation, we run the risk of traumatizing those who are actually affected by those situations. So we need to be real careful. That's just a kind of a word of warning, because I fell into the trap where it's like, oh, this will be good. Everybody will understand now. It's like, yeah, but what if that was your family? What happened?
Yeah.
Now you're dealing with it in a game situation. You're like, oh. So lots of content warnings, all that kind of stuff.
I was going to ask, how do you, so my game, I've been designing a game called Broken, which is a tragic romance game. It's basically a breakup or divorce game, where you create two characters and you actually break physical objects in each scene, and you can break, and there are different ways you can play it by collecting. Oh, I wish I had it here on my desk. I did for a long time. I had a game I played of it in playtest was one of the items was a record, and I literally got to snap the record and break it. Anyway, my point is that it's about something that's pretty tough and can be. I mean, I'm divorced, right? So I write the game because it's like one of the ways I'm processing. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I want it to be for people, but the idea of I don't want it to re-traumatize people. And so I've been kind of careful about wanting to make sure that I'm not, but it's a question of like, well, how do you really avoid that? And I other than warning people a lot, providing lots of safety tools,
that's really it. Is calibration is important to make sure that it's for the person. Even if it's about them, it may not be for them, right? That's kind of the thing. And a lot of people, it's like, I've gone through it, I don't need to play a game about it. Cool. A lot of the times when I'm trying to make a game that is supposed to invoke empathy, it's definitely not for the people who went through the trauma. It's for other people who don't understand why this is traumatic or the level of trauma. Like, yeah, breakup's hard. Breakup's super hard. It's like, yeah, but have you ever got divorced? And what does that actually feel like and look like? And, now we have two halves of something, right? And it's so visceral. Like, some people get so upset with like playing legacy games and ripping a card up.
Oh yeah, I love that. By the way, I love that.
I do too. I love it because it because it is memory invoking. Like, it literally burns that into your brain. And so, but those things that get burnt into your brain can be positive and not so positive, right? So when you're going through a breakup, when you're separating things like houses and cars and children and pets and whatnot, like, you're literally talking about, so some of those things, like a record, like, we really can't divide a record. You can have some records and I can have some records, but we can't split a record and both of us have it. Right. And so that's where this kind of processing of this traumatic event becomes very important in terms of how you frame it as a designer. So here's the thing from an educational standpoint is that we learn by doing. We do, but we really, really deeply process it by reflecting, right? And so one of the things that all the games that I make that have kind of a message game or whatever in it, is there will always be a debrief. Always be a debrief that has some pretty pointed questions about that. So processing what just happened and not just leaving people is really important. Making sure that they have a safe exit after an event that might bring up some bad memories for them, right? Even if somebody hasn't been divorced and they broke up with their longtime boyfriend like 10 years ago, playing this game might trigger some memories, right? And bring up some bad memories. And like, we need to make sure everybody's okay before we leave the table. You know, what's going on? How are your sports, et cetera, right? But there's very specific ways to do that. And writing up a debrief section for the GM to do that, or for the team or the table to do at the end of the game, is really important. Because it's not a sign of weakness, right? If you put it in the game as something that should be done at the end, people are going to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like,
might actually learn something from it.
Yeah. Well, like we were talking about with 4th edition, right? Like if the game pushes you in that direction, it's more likely someone's going to do it if you include it rather than, but like, I think right now as it stands, like I'm just processing what you're saying. And I'm like, yeah, I should really go back and attend more to that section of the game. Like, cause it does, like I offer debrief, I offer like that to players, but like I don't guide people through it in the explicit way that you're describing. And now I'm thinking, oh, maybe I gotta revisit that and see, or maybe I can even find someone who maybe I can get to write that section, who has like a lot of experience with safety at the table. But anyway, this is all, this is now going into, I know that I've gone too far in the show when I start processing my own game, which happens sometimes as we're doing the show. Can you want to tell people where they can find you out there in case they want to, interact with the game?
The best place to find me on the web is on Twitter at Sen-Foong Lim, SenFoongLim. That's how you spell my name. Yeah, I was wondering if there's a dot in there somewhere. No, that's it. That's good. And from there, you can find everything else that you need. Cool. I run the Ludology podcast with Gil Hova and Erica Buyuris. So I'm one of the co-hosts. That's a bi-weekly thing every 2 weeks. And then I am the weekly co-host of the Maple Syrup Show, which is a show about the hobby gaming industry, where we get people that you know, people that you don't know, to come up and talk about what they do in the hobby gaming industry, all the way from publishers and designers to content creators to community managers to graphic designers, illustrators, artists, et cetera, et cetera. So runs the gamut. And that is live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at 9:00 Eastern Standard Time.
Cool. And I'll make sure to link this stuff in the show notes for this. If you're watching this on YouTube, folks, it'll be just, if you're watching this right now on YouTube, just, it should be down. Unless you're watching this live on YouTube and it's not there yet, but everyone else, it's there later. So, Sen, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and for giving us this extra time. Awesome.
I can talk for hours. I'll be recognized.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to send back to our digital green room here and just do a little bit of end of the show housekeeping really briefly. So huge thanks again to Sen for making the time to come on the show. We deeply appreciate the time, and deeply appreciate all of you watching. If you're watching us live, you can hit follow on Twitch so you can make sure you see the pop-ups whenever we have new episodes. We've got some exciting episodes coming up next couple of weeks. We got Linda Codegas coming on next week. And then, like I said, the 1-year anniversary episode, Meg Baker is coming back on the show to interview me, which I'm super excited about. I'm nervous and excited about. And then we had to reschedule Jack Crawford, who was working on a project called Legends of Adversity from a number of weeks ago, because I wasn't able to do the episode. And so we rescheduled Jack. So next week, Linda's going to be on the show. April 4th is the anniversary episode with Meg Baker, and then Jack Crawford's going to be on April 11th. And then we have no episode because of Easter on April 18th. And then after that, actually another reschedule. So if you were waiting for Whitney Delaglio to come on the show, Whitney's awesome. I'm really excited to finally get to talk to her. We had to, because of some personal stuff, we had to move her, and the soonest we could get to do that was at the end of April. So she'll be on the show April 25th. Which I will be broadcasting at a clergy conference from somewhere else. So that'll be an interesting We'll see how that pans out. So that's what we got coming up with the episode. So like I said, make sure you hit follow so you can see these things when they go live, or maybe even better yet, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the little bell so you get alerts when there's stuff going on YouTube when you get a new episode. So you can watch all of our episodes. You can watch all of them live on the YouTube afterward. It's just Holy Happy Hour Batman on YouTube. You can go to allportsopen.com and you can watch everything right there on one feed. Also, if you prefer that. So if you want to support what we do in promoting deep conversations about TTRPGs, how that intersects with philosophy, psychology, spirituality, religion, game design, all that stuff. There's a lot of ways you can support what we do. You can subscribe on which is a financial way to contribute on Twitch if you'd like to support what we do. If you only caught part of this episode, I already said you can kind of go to those places and check out the whole thing. So huge thanks to Joshua Wise, my APON co-founder, for the artwork on the stream and everything he does to keep the lights on at allportsopen.com, all of his hard work. Thanks to Dr. Octorok, who does the music on the show that you heard at the beginning and that you're going to hear again in just 1 second. So huge thanks to Dr. Octorok. I'm Ben, that gamer priest. We'll be back next week. As I said, author and designer Linda Codega is joining us. I hope you'll be back next week. There might be a time change to the episode next week. And if so, I'll try to alert people on socials that that's happening. I think there was a little bit of a time mix up with Linda. So once I know the details of that, I will certainly let everyone know. So for now, enjoy the holiest and happiest of hours, my friends. I'm going to run a Delinquent Comics ad here for you before I end the show. So enjoy, and we will see you soon.
Calling all citizens of Halcyon City. The newest generation of heroes are now painting the pages of Delinquent Comics, a Masks new generation actual play podcast. Complete back issues are available now on allportsopen.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. You can help join the fight and hear the newest releases early by becoming a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/allportsopen. New bi-weekly episodes become available to all citizens on May 24th, featuring the newest arc, the Sunset Island Saga.